Michael, in the past few weeks, especially in the last week, we have been getting mixed signals from Donald Trump regarding this war. I mean, at one end, it seems that he wants to get out of this war, but on the other end, we hear news that the troop buildup is going on in the Middle East area. What sort of signals are you getting over there in America?
Right. Well, it wouldn't be the first time that we get mixed signals from President Trump on an important policy issue. I think there's several competing factors here at play. One is that there's a pretty strong domestic political pressure on President Trump to pull back from the war. He had promised his base that he would not get involved in new military adventures, and yet here he is calling for a regime change operation in Iran, and the U.S. military has been deployed. So that's one factor. The other is that President Trump, for whatever reason, has always he's expressed consistently hostile sentiment toward Iran. He's taken unconventional positions towards other traditional U.S. enemies and rivals like North Korea, China, Russia. He's reached out to all of them. But with Iran, he's always been consistently critical. And so I think there is that as well. And some of his aides think that the U.S. has actually made progress and that there's a possibility to, quote, finish the job, whatever that means. But again, at the same time, there is that pressure on him because of domestic political reasons to pull back and not go so far. So I think that helps explain the mixed signals.
And as far as the negotiations are concerned, the Iranians seem to say that they're not interested, they don't want to talk about this whole process now. But the Americans seem to be insistent about this, and obviously with Pakistan in the center. Do you think there could be a breakthrough through negotiations?
Well, I mean, we know that we had this important Pakistani visit to China to try to discuss the contours of a peace proposal, and so I think all eyes will be on what comes of that. And I understand that that proposal is just now being released. But look, I mean, I think that all the right things are being done, right? There's been coordinated engagement between all the key facilitators, Pakistan as well as Turkey and Egypt and China, as well as the Saudis for that matter. So I think that there's efforts to try to put on the table a realistic proposal. The problem, as I believe you suggested, is that both the U.S. and Iran have taken the most maximalist positions possible, and the U.S. has called on Iran to dismantle its nuclear program, which is not going to happen. So I think the key is to bridge that gap between the maximalist positions being taken between the U.S. and Iran and the more reasonable mid-level, middle ground positions that will be advanced by the facilitators.
And as far as the Middle Eastern countries are concerned, who have been targeted by the Iranian forces time and again, do you think they are also, they want to get out of this war, or do you think they're putting more pressure on the Americans to hit the Iranians much more harder than before?
I mean, it's hard to say. I think on the whole, particularly when it comes to the smaller Gulf states, there's a strong desire for the war to end. I mean, no one wants to be attacked. And when it comes to the likes of the UAE and Qatar, these are countries that so much of their economies are derived from energy production and energy exports, and that's of course been heavily impacted deleteriously by the war. Now, if you look at a country like Saudi Arabia, which of course is a traditional rival of Iran, it's also a larger, more powerful country. It has the capacity to hold its own. Maybe there'd be a different position there. But I would argue, given the very troubling direction that this war has gone in, and particularly with the Israel factor, which we haven't even spoken about, that's a whole different track. Israel, I think, is intent to continue to wage this war, even if the U.S. backs out. For all these reasons, I do think that countries in the Middle East would much prefer there be movement toward a de-escalation as well as potentially a ceasefire.
So, if I'm taking this correctly, you mean even if the Americans actually go and do negotiate and do get a deal out of this, we can't guarantee that Israel will also pull out from the war?
Right. I mean, I haven't heard any Israeli official indicate that they're prepared to follow the lead of the U.S. If it were to reach a deal with Iran. And as I said before, I think the Israelis are just on a different track. They're playing a long game. Certainly, many in Israel do not support what Israel is doing, but I don't think that you have the strong domestic political pressures in Israel that you do in the United States for their governments and militaries to get out of this war. So, yeah, I mean, that's of course a big wild card factor, not to mention a number of these facilitator countries, including Pakistan, don't have formal relations with Israel. So
Yeah.
it's not possible to try to engage with Israel to figure out ways to get it to de-escalate. It's just a whole other story.
So you think China could actually play a role over there in convincing Israel, or do you think that factor won't work out?
My sense is that the focus is not on Israel now. I think the focus is on the U.S. and Iran. I mean, my understanding is that was the focus of the Pakistan China meeting yesterday or into today. And certainly, I mean, China is a country that has relations with Israel and is, in a position to get through to it. And if you look at some of the other countries that have formal relations with Israel, like Egypt, and some of the countries that joined the Abraham Accords, like the UAE, they have the capacity to engage with Israel. But I think they'd need more help, quite frankly. And I'm not sure, again, if we look at the history, how Israel waged its war in Gaza, not really that susceptible to external pressure to change its war aims or to back out when it has a very clear set of objectives that it's dead set on achieving, no matter how long it takes.
And Michael, regarding the energy prices, if you, I mean, have a look at the oil prices, especially, uh, it's actually creating much more pressure on other nations. But do you think that is also a factor in Donald Trump's decision-making ability right now, or do you think he's totally ignored what's going on in the oil markets?
No, I think that's a huge part of his calculus. I think one of the major reasons why, well, there's several major reasons why. One of the major reasons why the president has wanted to push a peace process with Iran is the markets, the energy markets. So he's concerned about those, and he hopes that by, even signaling a desire for talks, that could calm the markets a bit. And I think that has been the case. Not to mention, I mean, clearly the president is very concerned about the Strait of Hormuz and the impacts that could have on U.S. transit. And Iran has been working out individual arrangements with several countries, including Pakistan, as I understand it, to let some shipping traffic through. But the U.S. is obviously not going to have much success there because it does not have formal relations with the Iranians. So absolutely, I do think that issue, the Strait of Hormuz issue, is a key factor driving the president's and the administration's thinking about, the idea of a peace process.
In the end, a last word on Pakistan. Has it come as a surprise to you that Pakistan has taken such a central position during all this? Or do you think that was quite natural? Obviously, the borders are together with Iran. Or do you think it comes as a surprise?
Now, I may be in the minority when it comes to external observers, but I've studied the region for quite some time. I'm not surprised at all. I mean, Pakistan, I've been saying this for days, it's one of the only countries with warm ties with both the U.S. and Iran, and it has not always been that way,
Hmm.
but that's how it is now. And I'd also argue that Pakistan is willing to proactively pitch itself as a facilitator and as a mediator because there's a lot at stake. It has a lot of skin in the game in the sense that few countries outside of the Middle East are as vulnerable as Pakistan is to conflict spillover risks because it borders Iran, as you
Hmm.
know. And then I also think Pakistan doesn't want to have to be in the position where it's pressured to invoke the Mutual Defense Pact with Saudi Arabia because Pakistan does not want to get dragged into the war.
Hmm.
So for these reasons, I'm not that surprised that Pakistan is playing this facilitator role. But of course, it's we have to distinguish between playing the role of go-between facilitator versus actually convening, hosting, overseeing direct talks
Hmm.
between the Americans and the Iranians. I think that's much more ambitious, and it could take a lot more to get to that point.
And if you look at the table, India is not sitting over there. It didn't get a seat on this whole situation. Do you think this happened due to the Pak-India war, or do you think it was basically Donald Trump who did not want to look towards India? What do you think? What happened?
Well, honestly, I don't think India ever had an interest in playing the role that Pakistan is. India tends to be much more cautious in its diplomatic approach compared to Pakistan. India would not want to play the role of a facilitator or a mediator unless the warring parties formally asked it to.
Hmm.
And I think in the case of Pakistan, it proactively positioned itself
Hmm.
as a facilitator, and there was no resistance from the warring parties. There had been talk about why India was not a mediator in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where it would have been very well positioned to play that role. It was not asked, as my understanding goes, was not asked by the Russians or the Ukrainians to play that role, and so it never served as a mediator. So that's one reason why we have a difference between the two cases, the two
But
countries.
but internally, Modi has been actually telling his audience over there in India that he could play a role in the Ukraine-Russia war, but he never got the chance to do that.
Right. I mean, that could be the case too. But, just as I said, Pakistan's one of the rare countries to have really good relations with both the U.S. and Iran. India is one of the few countries to have very good relations, especially with Russia, but also with Ukraine. But it's true. As I said, I don't think the Russians had any interest, or the Ukrainians had any interest in external mediation, which sort of put India in a position where it couldn't do anything. If it wasn't going to volunteer itself anyway, unless it was asked to, that basically meant that it had to just sit it out, so to speak.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us.